Wow, day 10 of 40 days of JavaScript. It means we have crossed 25% of the journey to become JavaScript expert and to know JavaScript in and out with fundamentals, code, assignment, project, task. I hope you're equally enjoying this initiative as I am. And if so, please continue. Please continue this journey till the end. Today, we are going to get started with scope and scope chain. In the last video, we spoke about hoisting, we spoke about temporal dead zone. We're going to continue the same thing to get into scope, understand the topic with a lot of examples, and at the end, don't forget to understand the task that I'm going to give it to you and complete them, submit them, so that you're not only learning the theory, you can also practice them and get better at it. Before we get started, a request would be, if you like this video, please post a like, give a comment, let me know how you are liking this. If you have any questions, come to Discord or post on the comment of this video. I'll get back to you with the answers. Unless you have any big questions in your mind about the channel and my teaching, you can always subscribe. That will be a great motivation for me. Let's get started with today's topic, scope and scope chain. I just want to let you know one thing, that time to time there might be certain changes in the plan, the way that we have laid out the entire 40 days in the beginning. We may not be able to stick to it always because there will be something that come extra and we have to put it. I don't want to skip anything. So if you have got this 40 days of JavaScript daily learning plan, if you have not, you must. The link is there in the description of this video. Please get it. It is free. It is for you. In that, you also have the entire syllabus chalked out. There is a small change that we have made recently. On day 9, we were supposed to do both hoisting and scope together, but I had to split it out because I wanted to also teach you about the TDZ, temporal dead zone. So that I have clubbed with hoisting in day 9. And so why day 10 is completely with scope and scope chain. So it might happen that we do some more adjustment down the line to make sure that we are not missing anything vital. All right, I hope it makes sense to you. To understand scope, let us start with a simple analogy. Imagine that you are in a house that has multiple rooms. Now, there will be something that will be available and accessible in all the rooms. For example, Wi Fi. Wherever we go inside the house, we'll be able to access Wi Fi, for example. But there will be again certain things that may not be available and accessible in all the rooms. Those might be available in a specific room for a specific person. For example, it could be a jug of water, maybe some small plant, or it could be a private diary and the pen. JavaScript variables behave exactly the same way. They behave based on where they are declared. And that's exactly what scope means. Scope means where a variable is accessible in JavaScript. Whether the variable is accessible in the global area, so global scope, or inside a function, so function scope, or inside some block, so block scope, depending on where JavaScript variables existence and the access is available, that determines the scope of that particular variable. So that is how we should understand the definition of scope. Overall, there are 4 types of scope in JavaScript. One is called global scope, then is a function scope, then there is a block scope, and the last one is a module scope. In this video, we are going to put our focus on first 3, global, function, and the block scopes. Module scope we won't learn in this video because we have a separate session for JavaScript modules in future. That's where we'll be speaking about module scope in details. So let's get started with understanding the first scope, which is the global scope. A variable that is declared outside of any function or a block that has the global scope. And that particular variable can be accessed anywhere. Now, we know what is function. We know what is block already from the previous sessions. And we also know that something that is not inside a block or inside a function is called global. So it means that a variable that will be declaring outside of this function and the block, we'll always call it as a global variable. And the global variable will be declared inside the global scope. So let's create it. We'll create a variable called let name equals to say tapas, and then let's create a function called greeting, and inside this function I will be able to say hello name. I'll be able to access this particular variable very easily. Now when I invoke this function over here, after this function execution happen, I can still do console.log of name, and this is going to give me tapas again. Why? Because this particular variable name is declared in the global scope. It is not declared inside a function, or it is not declared inside a block. As it is declared inside a global scope, the accessibility of this particular variable will be anywhere. I can access it inside a function, I can access it outside a function, I can even access it within a block. I can create a block like that, and inside that I can again say console.log inside block comma name. Correct? Now, if I run this program, I see here that the name Tapas has been logged everywhere, whether it is at the global position itself or inside the function or inside a block. So it means that it is available everywhere. Let's learn one more fundamental here. Now here I have created a global variable called name. I know that whenever there is a JavaScript file that gets loaded into the JavaScript environment, in the global execution phase, there will be two things that will be available. One is the window object and the this keyword. So in this case, I have a window object as well. Now if I do window.name, the name variable that I have created, is it going to give me the value tapas or not? It is not giving me the value tapas. Now let's go back to the code for a moment. Here this particular variable is declared with let. Now let's change this let to var and let's see the changes. Going back to the browser, same output, no change. But now I'm going to do window.name. Before it was giving me an empty string. Now it is giving me tapas. Why this difference? Only thing that I have changed over here, it was declared with let, now I have declared with var. Let's understand this part as well. When you declare a variable using var in the global scope, that particular variable becomes the property of your global object. The global object is what? The window object in your browser. So whenever you declare something in the global scope with var, you have to keep it in mind that this particular variable will be added as a property to the window object. That is when I was doing window.name, as name is now added as a property of the window object, it is going to give me the value tapas. When I had done it with let, this is not going to happen. When you declare a variable with let in the global scope, that particular variable is not going to get added to the global object, which is window in browsers. So in that case, when we did window.name, as the name was not available over there, it could not return me the value tapas. So the clear difference is var in global scope is get added to the window object, but if you create it using let or const, it doesn't get added to the window object. You have to remember. Now if you ask why exactly it is the case, the answer is also hidden in the understanding of scope itself. Very soon we are going to understand about the block scope. After function scope, we'll learn about block scope. Then we will talk about the let and const are blocked scope. And that is the reason they do not attach themselves to the window object. Okay, so we are going to learn that. Let us now talk about the function scope. A function scope in which a variable is declared inside a function and are accessible only inside that function. They are not accessible outside of the function. Okay, so if you declare a variable within a function, you can access that variable only within the function. If you try to access that variable outside of the function, you are going to get a reference error because that particular variable is not available outside of the function. Now here, there is a basic mistake that many of the beginners to JavaScript make. They think that whenever I declare a variable using var, irrespective of it is in global scope or in function scope, that variable will be always accessible everywhere. No, that's not true. If you declare a variable using var in the global scope, that variable will be accessible everywhere. So you can access that. Even using let or const also, you can access that variable anywhere if you have declared that in the global scope. We have seen. We have also seen just now, only variation between the var versus a let and const is for var, the particular variable will be added as a property to the window object. For let and const, it won't happen. We have seen the difference, that's in the global scope. Coming to the function scope, irrespective of you use a var, you use a let, you use a const, if your variable is declared inside a function, its lifetime is limited within that function only. You cannot access that outside of the function. Please remember this. So let's take an example. Here I have a function called to do, simple function, and I have declared a variable called task, and I'm saying learning 40 days of JS and doing a console.log of task inside the function itself. So declared a variable task inside a function and accessing the variable task within the same function. This will be allowed as per the function scope, because a variable that can be declared inside a function can be also accessed inside the function as per the function scope. Now let's execute the to-do function. If I execute this to-do function, of course, I'm going to see this particular console.log being printed, because this particular variable is declared inside a function, hence it can be accessed within the function, and we'll be able to see the output very clearly. Let's go ahead. So here I'm saying learning 40 days of JS is printed from the function. I'm not seeing any error. Let's go back to the code, and then after execution, let us do console.log of task once more. Now here, the variable declared with var, I have accessed this variable once within the function, which is legit allowed. Now I am trying to access the same variable outside of the function. Will it be allowed? As for the function scope, this is not allowed, because once you declare within the function, you cannot access it from the outside of the function, and I'm supposed to get a reference error. Let's go ahead and check. As you see, under error, uncaught reference error, task is not defined. This is how the function scope works. And in this case, if you notice, I have actually declared with var. So if you have ever thought that if you declared with var, you can access it anywhere, it's not true. It all depends where exactly you are declaring this variable. That's how the scope is defined for that variable. If I have done the same thing outside of this function, yes, you could have accessed that over here, anywhere. In that case, it will be globally present, but now it is only for this particular function scope. If I change this to let, the output is not going to change. I'm saying the same task is not defined. If I go to the messages, I will see this learning 40 days of JS printed only once, because it got printed from this particular console.log. But coming here, the execution failed, because here task is really not understood by JavaScript, because task here doesn't exist. You have not defined it. And in the execution context video wasting video, we have seen that when you have not really created something, then you are trying to access it, you are into what? Temporal dead zone, and you're going to get a reference error. That's exactly is happening over here. I hope the function scope is quite clear to you. Now let us talk about the third type of scoping, which is block scope. In case of block scope, the variables declared inside a block. So what is a block? We have learned already that the block is basically a pair of these curly braces. And where we use this, we use it with the if else block, we use it with the switch case, for loop, many places we use this, right? So whenever we do that, whether a if else, switch case, or for, we basically create a block using these curly braces. Any code that we write inside this block will be part of this block execution. Now, if I declare a variable over here, let's say I declare a variable let count equals to 10. And as usual, I'll do console.log of count. What do you think? This block will be executed? Because in JavaScript, without if, else, for, while, also you can execute a block just with the use of two curly braces. Now, if I go there on the browser console, I can see that 10 over here. This is the count 10. Now go back to the VS Code, try to do this console.log outside of this particular block. I'm sure I'm going to get a reference error for this count, because as per the block scope, I cannot access it outside of the block if it is declared inside the block. I have declared that count variable using let inside the block, so I'm not able to access it, and it's giving me a reference error. Fair enough. Now, if I try to do the same thing, instead of let, I'll do it using const. And if I come back to the browser, I'm getting the same error that the count is not defined. Okay, great, because this is what I have expected. Now, the twist in the tail, if I just do it with var, what do you think the output will be? Just now we spoke like a variable declared inside this particular block cannot be accessed outside of the block. Now I've declared a variable count var inside a block, and I'm trying to access the count outside of the block. I should get error, isn't it? Oh man, there is no error. And if I go to message, I see 10 got printed twice. One is line number 43 and line number 46. Line number 43, 46. What is happening? So it means I am able to access a variable that is declared inside a block outside of the block. Wow. Is breaking my block scope, isn't it? No, it's not. So here, another twist to the tail that you need to understand, and another pointers that you understand about scope is when you're talking about block scope, the variable declared inside a block, but here write this, the variable declared using let and const inside a block cannot be accessed outside of the block. But if the variable is declared with var, it can be accessed outside of the block. And this is where it defines the scope of a variable based on the specifier var let const you used for the variable. Remember and write this rule. Write this rule in your note. Var is always function scope. Let and const are always block scope. What does it mean? It means that if a variable is declared using var inside a function, you cannot access that variable outside. Okay? So var is always function scope. Function scope means it is only accessible inside a function. If it is defined and declared inside that particular function, you can only access it inside a function. So if you do that using var, that is what is going to happen. That's why var is function scope. But let and const are block scoped. It means that if you are creating a variable using let and const inside a block, you cannot access it outside of the block. You can only access it inside the block. But as var is a function scope, not in the block scope, var can be accessed outside of the block. Where var cannot be accessed outside of the function, only if you have created a variable using var inside a function. So this is what you need to remember. This is what you need to understand. That is where people get a lot of confusion. Towards the end of the session, I'm going to give you a table. I'm going to give you a chart so that if you put that chart somewhere, you are not going to forget any of these tricky situations at all. But always think from the hierarchy perspective. First come the global scope at the top level. Then come the function scope. Then come the block scope. So the top level, all are same. Everybody is having the similar kind of access. Var, let, const, everyone similar. All are equal, okay, over there. But when it comes to function scope, var, let, const, again, they are kind of same. Like outside of the function, you cannot access them. Now, when you go to the much more lower scope, which is like block scope, then var is little bit powerful than the let and const in a way that var can be accessible outside of the block because var is in the function scope, which is in a little bit higher scope, but let and const are only within the block. So outside of the block, they cannot be accessed. Like that, you have to remember, you have to take notes, and you have to practice. Again, see the table or the chart that I'm giving you at the end of it. At the end of the session, that will be really useful. Let us now start discussing about another important topic called scope chain. As we understood different kind of scopes like global scope, we understood about function scope, we understood about block scope. Now in your programming, you won't be having just one function, just one block like that, right? You will have function within function, you will have if else, you will have for loop. Inside the for loop, you might have another if. Inside the if, you might call another function. So you will have a plenty of combination of this function, block, and everything. Now, based on where you have declared your variable, we told that the scope of that particular variable is defined. Now, when you access the variable, what you have declared, how that value of that variable will resolve or how that variable will be accessed, it depending on a mechanism that JavaScript applies is called scope chain. In scope chain, the philosophy is like this. When JavaScript accesses a variable, JavaScript first search in the nearest scope whether the variable is available and accessible. If the variable is not available or accessible, it will go one more level higher. It moves outward. And then I try to search, do I have the variable? Okay, if I have the variable, it's accessible. Then if I don't have, then it will go one more level higher. Like that, it is going to reach till the global scope level. Even if the variable is not available, is not accessible, then it's going to give a error like reference error, or the variable is not found. Otherwise, it's going to get the variable and going to give you the value. Let's try to understand that with an example and also apply all the rules that we have learned so far. Okay, try to understand those rules along with the scope chain. So first thing is, at the global level, let us create a global variable. We'll create a global variable and let's give it a value saying that I am a global variable. Now let's create a function called outer. And inside this function, let us have one more variable called outer variable, and we'll tell it like I am an outer variable. Fair enough. Then we'll have one more function called inner, and inside this we will have one inner variable. Let's say inner var equals to I am an inner variable, and over here, okay, this is a spelling mistake, it's let, And over here, what we are going to do, we are going to do console.log of inner variable, outer variable, and global variable. We are trying to print all of them over here. Now for this inner function to come into picture, we have to execute this one. So we will do inner execution. We have learned that in function. And for outer also to come into picture, we will be executing the outer as well over here outside. Let's try to figure out what will be the output of this guy. Okay, before seeing the output in the console, let us try to understand. Now here I am executing outer. So outer comes here, fine. Let outer variable will be declared in the memory, that's great. Then inner also will go to the memory, great. Then in this execution phase, inner will be called. Once inner gets called, this particular variable in its creation phase will be created, and in the execution phase, all this inner variable, outer variable, global variable will be executed one by one. Now the fun. When we say inner variable, an inner variable is something that's got declared inside this function. So you will think in this way that inner variable is in the functional scope of the inner function because it has been declared inside the inner function, and we are accessing it within the inner function itself. So with function scope definition, what we have learned that if a variable is declared inside a function, it is accessible within that function but not accessible outside of the function. So we are creating over here and we are accessing over here inside the function itself. So this is fair enough. So this is going to print I am an inner variable. Now comes outer variable. Outer variable, now JavaScript is going to search, is there something called outer variable that is declared inside this inner function? Oh no, outer variable is not declared inside the inner function. Now JavaScript will start searching upwards in something called scope chain. This is why it is called chain. It starts somewhere in the inside and then it is going to go outside one by one till the global scope. So the inner functions outside is the scope of outer function because inner function is defined within the outer function. So inner functions outside, if it has to go, think about this way that there is an invisible arrow that goes outside from here. Ting, 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 ting. Ah. So if I come over here, so I see there is something called outer var and I'm trying to access outer var. So if I find in my scope chain, I will be able to access it. If I don't find in my scope chain, I won't be able to access it. So I found in my scope chain. I didn't find inside this function, but going outside of the function following the scope chain, I could found this outer variable over here. If I am able to find it, that means I'll be able to access it. And thus, this is going to also give me a console.log saying that I am an outer variable. Then comes the global variable. Now for the global var, inside inner, it is not declared. So JavaScript will follow the scope chain, go to its outer, which is the outer function. Inside outer function also, this is not available. There is only outer variable. Global variable is not inside this outer function. JavaScript will try to find out, do I have any other thing outside of my outer function? Yes, outside of the outer function, there is a global scope. And in the global scope, because there are no other function outside of this function, so there is a global scope. And in global scope, I have something called global var. And this is what I'm trying to access it over here. So it will be accessible. You're getting the point. The tiniest inside position, the lexical position of this particular function inner was over here. And if I'm starting to search this particular variable, don't find it inside it, I'll go to the scope outside of it. The scope outside of it, outer function scope, which is from here to here. I don't find it here, I'll go outside of it. Outside of it, in this case, is a global scope. In the global scope, I found the global var, so I'll be able to print that in the console.log as this one. So this is what the output will be. Now let's do one more twist. Let's take this console.log outer var, and after the execution of outer, let us print it over here. What do you think the output is going to be in this case? We know when outer got called, all these three console.log will be executed. But after that, if I have a outer var, will the outer var value will be resolved to I am an outer variable, or it is going to give you an error? It is of course going to give you an error, because if you follow the same philosophy, this guy, our JavaScript, going to search whether this outer var is anywhere declared in the scope where it is being accessed. So it is being accessed in the global scope, because this because this particular console.log is not inside any function. This is the function you have, and this is outside of the function. If you see this, now this is already a global scope. There is nothing outside of it. It cannot go by scope chain outside of global scope. Global scope is the highest possible scope where things are right now. Now in this global scope, there is nothing called outer var. There is nothing called outer var declared over here. So of course, this is going to give me a reference error. I hope you understood this one quite well. So with the same learning, let us try to solve one more problem so that we understand things better. And I have given you enough tasks, guys. You have to understand these things to successfully complete the task. So here I have a variable called count, and then there is a function called outer. After outer function, we are executing the outer function, and then we are doing a console.log of the count. Inside outer, I have another variable called count. Name is same exactly. And then I have a function called inner, and I'm executing inner, and I'm doing a console.log of count. Inside inner, I have same name variable called count. Outside, count value was 10. In the outer function, count value was 20. In the inner function, the count value is 30. Here I'm executing inner and then console.log of count. Now, what will be the output and why the output will be there? And then let's tweak the situation and find out how the output will be changed. Please understand these things very well, because here the concept of scope, whatever we have learned, will be very clear, and it will help you to do the task also very effectively. So first, think about the global execution context, function execution context, their creation phase, execution phase perspective. I'm not going to write them because we have done enough in last two videos. You have learned that, but let's iterate it by mouth, like how exactly happened. So in the global execution context creation phase, you will have this count variable memory got created. Excellent. This outer function will be in the memory. Excellent. In the execution phase of the global execution context, the count variable will have the value 10. Excellent. And then it will execute this outer. Correct. The moment it executes this outer, it won't go to this line number 86, right? It will go inside the outer function, we know. Then a function execution context will start. The function execution context will have again two phases, creation phase and execution phase. In creation phase of outer, the memory for count will be created. This particular function will go into the memory, and then in the execution phase, the count will have a value of 20, and then this inner will be executed. As inner is executed, this console.log won't be called, will go inside inner. Now once we are inside inner, this particular function again will have its own creation and execution phase. In the creation phase, the count variable gets created in the memory. In the execution phase, count variable will be assigned the value 30, and then console.log will be 30. And then inner will come out of the execution stack or the call stack. Correct? This is how we have learned. Now, if you think this from the scope point of view, from this particular point, like inside out, here, this count variable we are accessing, and we have declared this count variable inside this function. It is much easier to understand. The count having a function scope. Okay. So it is accessible over here because it is declared also over here. Great. Now this inner function execution will be over, and after the inner function execution over, this particular console.log, this count will be called. Now for this count, what it will look like in my scope. In my scope means this particular count is being accessed inside the outer function. In my scope, do I have a count declared? Oh yeah, I have a count declared. So count is 20. Here the value will be 20. Great. Here the value will be 30. Let's write this. Then the outer is over, out of the call stack. Then this particular console.log will be executed. Do I have any count declared in the global scope? Because this is the global scope, this is not inside a function. Yeah, I have a count called 10. So it means that the value of this will be 10. Very straightforward. Now let me bring a twist. Let me pretend this line is not there. What will happen then? Think from the scope and the scope chain perspective. Now you have reached here. Through your function execution context, you have reached here. You are trying to print this console.log of count. So JavaScript is going to check, hey, this count is being accessed inside a function called inner. Do I have a variable declare called count over here? No, I don't have. Now let me go out of my scope chain. So I'll go out of the scope chain following that invisible arrow, and I'll find, hey, outside there is a variable called count. It says it is available just in its outside scope. So in scope chain, I can now access this outside variable count whose value is 20. So that means this count can be resolved to this 20 now, because by scope chain I can access it from the outside of a scope. As I don't find it inside, I went outside and found, but this time the count's value is 20. So now the value is changed to 20. Excellent. This value is 20. Inner got executed. This remains same because this count is found over here. So this will be 20 again. This remains same because this count is found on the outside. So this remains 10. Now again, let's do another twist. Let's pretend that this guy also not there. Again, start from inner. Starting from inner, this particular count is being accessed. Oh yeah. So this count is not there inside this function. So I'll go outside the scope chain to is outside. Outside also I don't see any count. Inside the outer there is no count now because I have now commented out. Now through scope chain it will go outside of the function. Outside of the function is right now is the global context. In the global context it has a count whose value is 10. So now then this guy's value will be 10. Inner execution is over. Come to this particular count. Do I have a count declared inside the outer function? Oh no, I don't have a count declared inside the outer function. So following the scope chain, let me go outside. If I go outside, I see on count 10 is declared over here. So okay, its value will be 10. Now when I come to this count, do I have a count declared over here outside? Yes, I have something called var count 10. So this value is 10. Now it is 10, 10, 10. You see, based on where I am declaring this particular variable count, this particular count value is changing. It was 30 once, then it become 10, then it become 20, now it become 10. So depending on which count it is accessing, and all these count variable are different. They are not the same variable because they have every time declared with var. It's not like that they have declared with var over here and I have reassigned the value over here. Every time they have carried this var over here, so it means that every time they have created a new variable, and each of the time there is a different value was assigned to it. Now to which count it resolved to, it all depends on the scope. In this case, inner case, when it was available, it will directly resolve to this because JavaScript start with the nearest scope. If it doesn't find, then with the following the scope chain it will go outside. Following the scope chain it will go outside. Following the scope chain it will go outside till the global. If it doesn't find it in the global as well, this guy is going to give a reference error then over here. You're getting it? So this is how you should be thinking about scope chain. Now let's understand another concept called variable shadowing. So many things to learn, isn't it? But it's worth giving this time right now, because if you learn all these things now, even if you go to React or anywhere else tomorrow, you will be able to understand what exactly happening inside. Variable shadowing is something, a situation I would say, that occurs when a variable in an inner scope has the same name as the variable of an outer scope. And what happens then? It effectively hiding the outer scope variable within the inner scope. That means inner scope having the same variable name as the outer scope variable name, and it hides the outer scope variable, its value, with this inner scope variable value. Okay. So in this case, what will happen? JavaScript, instead of getting confused, it will prioritize the variable in the nearest scope and ignore the one at the outer scope. So let's understand that with an example. Our count example was also like that, but let's take a simpler example to focus on this topic now. Let's take let message equals to I am doing great, and let's create a function. Name is situation, and here I'll be taking the same message variable and we'll say I am not doing great. Okay, so there is a difference here. There is no not, here is a not. And then I will do console.log of message. Okay, I'll print it over here. And after that, let me invoke situation and then do console.log of message again. Let's try to understand what will be the output. So what will be the output over here? Will it be I am not doing great or I am doing great? This will be definitely I am not doing great. So with variable shadowing, what we learn, if the inner scope has the same variable name as the outer scope, JavaScript will prioritize the variable that is nearest to the scope. This particular variable will shadow the value of the outside. So in this case, it will be I am not doing great. Now, once the situation gets executed and I am trying to execute this one, console.log message, here what will be the output? Will it be I am not doing great or I am doing great? In this case, think about in this way, this message is now no way related to the message variable that we have declared inside the function. Go back to our earlier rule of function scope. When a variable declared inside a function, it can only be accessed within that function. So that means this message variable, which is declared inside the situation function, can only be accessed inside the situation function. Outside of the situation function, it doesn't have any scope. So this message is definitely not the message that is declared over here, because from here I cannot access anything that is declared inside the function. From here I will be able to access if anything declared in the global scope. Yes, global scope, there is another message which is saying I am doing great. So here is going to print I am doing great. Okay, so don't get confused with with these things, like, here message is there, I am doing great. Here I have late message, I am not doing great. Is this message going to take the outer one? No, it is not, because by rule it is always the closest one. From outside it doesn't have the access to the inside one, so we'll take if there is something declared outside. If they're not declared, means it is going to give you an error, a reference error. As simple as that. Before we end, just want to remind you that the task for day 10 is in the task.md file, and you have bunch of tasks. You not only have things that you have to do, but you also have quiz type tasks. And everything that you will find in the task.md file is from the previous session plus the scope session. So please pay your attention and try to solve those. And once you solve them, you know our Discord. Come and submit your task in the task assignment channel of 40 days of JavaScript. If you have not joined our Discord, please find the link in the description of this video so that you can join the Discord and you can start discussing with us. All the source code is in the GitHub. Please go there. That link is also there in the description of this video. You can check that out. So before I sign off, I told that I'm going to get you a table with all the things that we have discussed. So please keep this table in your mind. Please print this table somewhere or keep this table in your Notion, so that anytime you get confused, go refer to this table, you will get the answer. So here goes that particular table. We call it as a comparison table as well, comparison table of var, late, and const. Let's understand that. So in terms of scope, var is function scope. We know that defined within the function, you cannot access it outside of the function. But with var defined inside a block, you can access it outside of the block. Late and const are strictly block scope. It means defined inside a block, you cannot access them outside a block. Very much we understood. In terms of wasting, we know that var, if you declared with var, it can be wasted and it is initialized with undefined. In case of late and const, we understood temporal dead zone part in the last video. If you declared with var in the global scope, whatever variable you are declaring, it will be attached to the window object. We have learned that. In case of late and const, it's not going to happen. Can var be redeclared? Yes, of course, it can be redeclared. You can do var name equals to tapas. Again, you can do var name equals to tapaScript. Possible. Can late be redeclared? No, late cannot be redeclared. You cannot do late name equals to tapas. Again, late name equals to tapaScript. However, you can reassign. Redeclaration and reassignment are different. Redeclared means with the same name, you are declaring it multiple times. Late name equals to this, late name equals to this, late name equals to this. Reassign means late name equals to this, and then again name equals to this. Second time you are not using the late. So late and const cannot be redeclared. Var can be redeclared, and that is a source of many confusion. So please avoid var. Can be reassigned? Yes, var can be reassigned. Late also can be reassigned, but const cannot be reassigned. So why it is constant? Initial value required for var and late to create variable. You don't have to initialize with anything. If you don't initialize with anything, it will be undefined once you declare. But in case of const, you must have to give a value. It must be initialized. You have to remember. So in this case, it is yes. Is it mutable? Mutable means something can be changed. Immutable means it cannot be changed. Yes, var is mutable. Yes, late is mutable. Of course, const is immutable. Once it is declared, you cannot change its value. Should you use var, late, const in loops? First of all, var and late are definitely allowed to be used in the loop. You can use both of them, but it is recommended that you use late. Why? I'm going to show you again with an example. Somehow I can't stop teaching. I'm going to show you that why it is. In case of const, you cannot use it in loop, because in case of loop, what we'll do is like you will initialize with a value, then you'll match the condition, then you'll increment, decrement, that particular variable. You have learned that in the for loop, while loop, do while loop in a loop session. But const, what you have learned, like once you have assigned something, some value, you cannot really change it. So you cannot increment and reassign to the same variable, right? That means const is not the right thing to use. But let's understand with the scope again that why it is recommended to use only late for loops and not var. Okay, with that we'll end this video. But I want all of you to take a good note of this table. Is there in the readme.md file of day 10. If you like my work, don't forget to give a start to the repository, because I'm building everything from ground up to make you understand. It will be great help. Also, don't forget to subscribe. The last thing now, to understand the for loop with var and let. Let's write a for loop. For var I equals to 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. And then over here, console dot log of I. Excellent. 0 to 4 I have printed because it started with 0, less than 5 means till 4 it will go. Now the thing is, with block scope, why we use scope? The whole fund of using scope is you will not want your variable to be polluted elsewhere. Wherever a variable is required, it will be confined in that particular scope and be used. That's why there is a function scope, block scope, etc. We learned var is function scope. It is not block scope. That means though I have created this I using var, this particular guy is not block scope. So it means that outside of this block also this I is available. So it means if I now do a console.log of I, very small things, but people don't realize, see, I'm able to access I. But with a good programming practice, I should not be. Because whenever I am creating a variable within a scope, after the scope, that variable should die. If I am able to access it from outside, I will be able to set any value to this guy. This might impact anything else inside this particular for loop any point in time, because this is the same I am able to access outside of the for loop also, and I'm able to pollute this I. That is where you should not be using var in the loop. Now the same example, if I just do instead of var let, same output, but let's try to do console.log of I. Wow, I cannot access it because I is not defined now. This is what I wanted, because once the for loop got executed, no one should access I to pollute it. With var you could do it, with let you cannot do it. I hope you understand now why let is the recommended way to go for loops, not the for. So guys, I'm saying bye bye again. Coming back next video, day 11, going to be a rocking one, because we are going to get started with closure. That closure, what we all think is very, very complex, and I'm going to prove it to you guys that this is one of the most simplest thing to understand in JavaScript, provided you have learned everything that I have taught you, provided you know about function, inner function, and the scope. Closure is going to be a cakewalk in day 11. See you there.